right. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. Appreciate it. You never know with these things if it's going to be, 50 people or 2 people, so this is perfect. And I think I've pretty much met almost everybody here, so it's great to see y'all. And if I haven't met you, then definitely feel free to introduce yourself. At some point, I'm going to talk about my show here and also give a little bit of context kind of for where all this is coming from, and talk about some past work a little bit and kind of just maybe my trajectory as an artist a little bit. I'm thinking maybe 25 minutes of talking, and then of course we can have some dialogue, and I don't think it needs to be super formal, so any moment you have a question or comment, feel free to jump in. But then after I talk about the work, I thought I'd do a really brief demo of how I use glazing in the work, because it's a technique I use. I know there's some painters here, so won't be super exhaustive, but it'll just be kind of like a couple things that I do with glazing. So so I have been showing at the gallery here for, I have to do the math, but 27 years. So my first show here was in 1998, back in the Annex, when the Annex was still going, and I remember seeing an ad in the paper. It wasn't an ad, it was an article that I think Mary Add had written when the Annex opened, and it was like, Groveland Gallery's doing great, and they're expanding, and they've opened up a new space, and they're hoping emerging artists will show in the space. And I saw that, and I thought, wow, okay, this is my opportunity. And came in, and Andrea was working here with Sally, and they were just so nice. I came in, was very nervous, of course, but anyway, had a great conversation, and then ended up showing them some work a bit later, and then started showing. So this is my 11th exhibition at the gallery, my 11th kind of like solo exhibition. It is my 5th show of showing interiors. I've done other kinds of work, which I'll talk about in a minute. And it's my 3rd show of doing paintings that are completely from the house that I currently live in. So all these paintings, except for one, which I'll talk about, are from my house. They're paintings of my house. So I have done a few things over that time. So there's been a lot of paintings of interiors, but I've always, in some way or another, my paintings have always been about the built environment. So usually about houses, but definitely about other kinds of buildings, urban spaces. I brought with me some, where did I put those? Brought with me some cards here that I wanted to show you because I wasn't sure who would be here and your level of familiarity with my work. Looking around the room, I think most of you sort of know this trajectory a little bit, but this is the work I was doing when I first started showing here, late 90s, like really sort of structures from my imagination, kind of maybe arguably a bit naive, maybe would be a description of them. I have to say that when I painted them, I thought they were very realistic. So I did that for a number of years, probably 10 years, and at some point early 2000s, I ended up enrolling at MCAD to go to graduate school. So I was there for 2 years doing my MFA work, and I studied with Mike Carrican here, who is my mentor. And I have one of my mentees, Mei Ling, back here. So it's good to see y'all. But during that time at MFA, at MCAD, what I really kind of learned was how to paint. I learned how to observe and how to paint from observation, because like I said, I thought these paintings were like fairly real. But working with Mike, I really kind of worked through processes of observation, and I ended up getting into maybe painting more interiors, although this isn't really an example of that, but this is a painting that was this is the mailing card for an exhibition I had in 2004, which was right after graduating from MCAD, and at the time I started to build little model houses. So this is like a little model house, and then I would set it up, in an interior, and I would take a photograph of it usually, or maybe I would paint from observation, but I was working from observation, but I wanted to tie it into the idea of the house and the interior. And then I moved away from Minneapolis for about 10 years and lived mostly in Chicago, but also in Milwaukee and Michigan a little bit. And at that time, I got really into urban kind of spaces. So I was very interested in like urban industrial paintings. There's certainly a legacy of that kind of work at the gallery. Rod Massey is here, and Mike Kerrigan does that kind of work, and Mike Lynch, who I'm sure you all know. So these are paintings of Minneapolis, all of these, but I did a lot of paintings of kind of Chicago and Milwaukee and things like that. But it really shifted my emphasis sort of to the outside world and working from photographs, and I also did a fair amount of work kind of out on the street, just painting from observation. So moved back here in 2016, and at that point I really kind of turned towards working with interior imagery again. And so I did a show here of the apartment that my wife Melanie and I were living in near Lake Harriet, and then we bought a house in 2019, I think, or 2018, and subsequently my work has been kind of about that. So that's the through line of sort of working with the built environment. The whole idea of the house, though, there's a lot of things about it that I'm interested in, and going back to graduate school, when I was in the program, I ended up writing my thesis paper about I believe the title of the paper was The House as Self. So I was really interested in the idea of, how can we think about like a house and interior space as being sort of metaphor for the self in terms of content. So there's a lot of things I was investigating, kind of researching about that. One of them is the idea that when you dream about a house, you're usually, that house is kind of like representing yourself. Different rooms mean different things. The kitchen is a space of transformation. The living room is like the public facing part of the house, or the front yard. The bedrooms, something else in the basement. And so the way that the house structure is kind of compartmentalized is very similar, to how we sort of compartmentalize like different aspects of our personalities. So I was definitely thinking about that. Thinking also just about the way that a house is. We have all these associations with the house because it's literally like a reflection of us. Like in our homes, we put all the things on the walls that reflect the things that we think are beautiful or important, or our values. All these things, our aesthetics, are literally on the walls, and our houses are like a mirror of ourselves. And then we're always touching the house too. We touch the doorknobs and we walk across the floors, and all those things. That the house becomes kind of an extension of the body, maybe. So there's metaphorical parts of this, and there's associative parts of this. But at any rate, the house is kind of an apt metaphor for thinking about representing yourself, maybe, or states of being, possibly. And so it's something that I think about in my work. And so with the interior paintings, what I want to kind of just go over is just some themes within these paintings that I tend to kind of think about. So one of those things is light. Like, I'm really interested in, as a painter, interested in light, and I have always loved paintings that exude a kind of luminescence, like that feel like they kind of glow with their own light in a way, or paintings that just feel like they have a convincing sense of like, I have always been drawn to kind of dramatic, light and shadow. So that's a theme in the work that's kind of always been there. It shows up in sort of different ways in different bodies of work, and it depends a little bit on how I'm working, which we'll talk about in a second. So light is a theme, and also point of view. like the point of view is definitely a theme, and it's, I mean, you can't get away from point of view. You're always looking at something from a certain point of view. But by way of example, maybe I don't have a digital projector or anything today. So, which is maybe good, because we probably look at screens way too much. But I brought this painting because it was part of the last exhibition I had at the gallery. And the reason that I brought it, and I'll just hold it here, it's fine. The reason that I brought it, thinking about light, that group of paintings, although there were some paintings that had this sort of very maybe dramatic light, but that particular group of paintings was a little bit different than this in terms of light, and part of the reason for that was because that group of paintings was painted from through a process of direct observation, very consciously. So like, I wasn't using any photographs when I did all those paintings. It was very much part of the process was that I would, camp. This is our kitchen, looking out the back door in the kitchen. And so I would, camp out in the same spot. I think this was a morning painting, as I recall. And, on a gray day, that was the day I could paint. In the same spot, the light would do the same thing. So, I could kind of continue the painting. With this particular kind of painting, I start with a pretty detailed like line drawing, and then I'm slowly kind of filling that in with the painting. But the way that where I'm going with this is that in terms of light, when you're working that way, it's difficult to paint something like this. It's not impossible, but it's hard because the sun moves. It's always moving, right? And so it's like a moving target. And not only is it a moving target, but it's like, you've got literally like a week or two where the sun's going to do something like even sort of remotely similar to that, and then it's moved on and it's not going to do it again until the next year, right? So some of those paintings that were in the last show were paintings that took place over 2 years because I literally didn't finish it, and I had to kind of like wait around for the next year for it to come around. But this painting, because it was more of a kind of a gray day, that was a little bit easier. That kind of remained constant. But what happened with it is that over time, I don't know how long it took, but it certainly took a few weeks, and it probably started in, I guess, probably late winter and ended up in very, very early spring, because I remember the show opened in April, so this probably would have been one of those ones that I brought in wet. But when you work that way, you're in the space and you're sort of observing everything that's going on like around you, and birds, and maybe the same cat walks by the window every day, or somebody gets in their car and goes to work or whatever. But you're experiencing the space, and those things kind of come into the work. So back to the idea of the house as kind of a metaphor for self or a state of being, like in a painting like this, like I don't think about those things necessarily really in a very literal way, like I'm going to set out to make this painting about how I feel when X and Y happens, or my relationship with this person. I don't think about those things. I am drawn to certain images that just seem like they have a kind of resonance. I mean, that's just the best way I can describe it. But sometimes, hopefully, through the course of making a painting, you sort of figure out what that's about, if you're lucky. I don't always do that, but like with this one, when I think back about it now, I was looking at it this morning, and it was literally late 2021, early 22. We're just kind of coming out of this pandemic where we were all sort of inside, and everything in the painting is kind of gray in a way, except for what's out the window, or this tree. Well, it's not this tree, but the ones behind it are starting to kind of bud out. And so when I think about it in retrospect, it feels kind of like how that felt. Here's the door, we're ready to open the door and go out there, and like the world is starting to be teeming, with life again. And so I know it's just a painting in my kitchen and looking at the alley and my neighbor's wonderful tree, but those kinds of stories, I feel like when I look at the paintings, they exist in the paintings. They may exist more for me, but hopefully, when other people look at it, that they can kind of get some of that kind of narrative from it. So with that kind of brings me to maybe talking about this work. And so part of the reason I wanted to talk about these paintings is because this is the third show of paintings of my house. And so one of the things that I struggle with is, and it may be the last, we'll see, but it's like, how am I gonna do this? Like, what have I not done already that would be possibly interesting to paint in my house? Or how can I approach this or think about it maybe in a slightly different way? And so that was all about direct observation. These paintings, they're a little bit more about trying to create a space that's somewhere between being really specific on the one hand, but also a bit edited or maybe a bit generalized, a bit simplified. There's a little bit more of a kind of a minimal, I think, a little bit more of a kind of minimal feeling to them. And so, with these paintings, I'm trying to land them, would be a way I would say it, land them in a space where, on the one hand, there are elements of realism when you look at them, this looks real or that looks real. It feels engaging and maybe illusionary. Hey, Danny. That's important to sort of draw someone in to look at the work, but I also am very consciously trying to kind of withhold. I'm withholding information and keeping the paintings a little bit general because I want people to be able to project kind of their own experiences or their own memories into the paintings. If it gets too specific, then it's about my house. It's painting in my house. If I've got my, whatever I have on my wall or my house plan, or house plants are different, but if I've got my personal effects all around, then it's hard for someone to travel to that. So I'm very consciously sort of editing those things out and trying to create the paintings in such a way that they are hopefully engaging and illusionary, but also open to people, for them to feel familiar. One of the things that people say with the paintings or ask me is sort of like, hey, I feel like this reminds me of exactly of the house that I used to live in South Minneapolis. I know what that radiator sounds like, or I know what it smells like when it comes on the first time in the winter and it's kind of dusty, and it's just like hopefully the paintings are evocative in that sense, but I think if they get too specific, sometimes they can't be. So some of the devices that I use to kind of arrive at that, maybe what I hope is sort of a sweet spot. One of them is editing, and my house is pretty minimal. It's not too hard to edit things out, but these paintings are different from these, and they were all derived from photographs. I'm working from photographs in all of these. So I've got taken hundreds of photographs probably, and I could crop the photographs in Photoshop or something, and I do a lot of that. I can crop things out. I didn't, in this particular work, I'm looking around, and maybe you can correct me, Melanie, but I don't think that I edited anything out. Like I'm not consciously taking things out that were really there. I'm just finding views where some of those things aren't really present. So that's kind of a part of this. It's about cropping. Editing could also be, and definitely is, sort of about how maybe an image gets painted. For me, I'm always interested in this kind of dramatic interplay of light and shadow, and things get buried in the shadows a little bit. And for me, that's kind of like a device to maybe bring less attention to some things and more attention to other things. What's in the light is something that maybe we can see a lot more of, and there may be a lot of other things that are in the shadow, or maybe they're implied that they might be in the shadow, but those things are, their presence is kind of pushed back a little bit, is what I would say. So That's another kind of way that I think about editing. Let me look at my notes here. I feel like I'm forgetting something. This particular group of paintings is, the title of the show is Window Light, and so it's not so much that I kind of set out to make a group of paintings that was about window light. It was more that somewhere in the middle of making these paintings, I realized that everything in here, all the light that we're seeing, it's all coming from windows. I mean, maybe it could come from a door, but it's probably coming from the window that's in the door. So in some of the paintings, some of them are paintings of windows, like these are very much, paintings of windows, and some of the paintings are paintings of the idea of a window that's maybe implied through light and shadow, but not really sort of shown. The window's not there. Some of the paintings are obviously about looking out my windows and looking at other people's windows. So I think about sort of that metaphor of the house as a person again, and you're looking at your neighbors, and you're feeling the human presence of them kind of across the yard as you look at their lights turning on in the early morning or turning off at night. So it just became kind of, I sort of realized that was maybe the common, one of the common things that was kind of linking the group, the work together, was this idea of the window and window light within the interior. So I do want to talk a little bit about some influence here. So I think influences, but the one more thing that maybe I'll say is that the scale of these is also something that was a little bit different. I mean, I do a lot of small paintings. That's just kind of been my thing always. I do some larger paintings. Well, this one's obviously larger. I would call that a medium-sized painting, but I do some pretty large paintings too. But this group of paintings, I definitely was consciously thinking about small paintings. Part of it being that it's kind of a small room, and it's intimate, and I just feel like the scale of the paintings, you're trying to sort of have it be appropriate for the space. But I also think even more so, I'm thinking about kind of intimacy and interiority, and just this idea that these are like little kind of private moments. Maybe they're a little mysterious, a little secretive, and there's something about, I feel like that maybe can be communicated better in a smaller scale painting, at least the way that I paint. When a painting gets really large, right, it's like, you see the giant Courbet painting at in Paris, it's enormous, right? It's 20 feet long or something, and that's a very public kind of facing painting, and these are really private paintings. Maybe there's something contradictory in there, because I'm at the same time hoping that everybody can kind of project their own experience on them, which is very kind of common experience. But that's just kind of some of the things that I'm thinking about. And I also I haven't framed work for a while, and I did for these paintings, and I feel like it maybe amplifies just that sense of kind of interiority, perhaps. Like the paintings have they themselves are kind of in an interior space inside the frames. In a way, they're sort of like set off from the surrounding walls. It gives them a kind of like barrier, maybe, I guess, that you can sort of go inside of them. So it's fun to frame work again. I did build the frames for this show, which was challenging. But any questions so far? Yeah.
Well, maybe you're going to touch on it, but
Yeah.
you pointed to that painting there as being different, and I know you told me a little bit about it, but I wonder if you have anything to say about that one.
Yeah, this painting it's the only painting in the exhibition that is not my house. It would be lovely if it was my house, because it's a view out to Lake Superior. It's at the what's the name of the place? It's the lodge, that's Cascade Lodge. That's by Lutsen up there. We went there last summer, and this was it was the view from our the room that we had that kind of looked out on the lake. So I'm not sure what else to say about that. I think maybe it's different because on the one hand we see outside the window, but the light's on in the room, so it's also like that's kind of a reflection of the light that's in the room. So it's like a slightly different kind of light. Maybe it's not window light. Maybe it's light bulb light.
Different kind of light coming through the window.
Yeah.
Well, that one, it has a more abstracted, slightly more kind of, it sort of reminded me of George O'Keeffe a little bit. It's just something about it that's different. Obviously the space is different, the color of the interior space is different, but it feels like you flattened it more, or there's a modernist kind of vibe to that piece. It's a little different than the other work.
Thank you for asking, because you're reminding me of the thing I forgot. I couldn't remember what it was, but the thing that I forgot was that the other thing that's maybe a little bit different about this work is point of view. And like, that's a good example. A lot of these are really flat. Like, not all of them, like this one's not, or that one, but actually none of those, but many of them they're flat views. Like, we're in one point perspective, we're looking at a flat wall, and in some ways, like, a lot of the perspective of the room has been not edited out, it's not within the picture frame. And that's really different from other work that I've done. Like, these are paintings from one of my previous shows. Like, we're very much down in this painting, and we're sort of looking, we're looking up, or this painting is, it's really specific. We're kind of half hiding behind the window and like looking out, and it's a sort of 2-point perspective. That kind of viewpoint, I feel, is really, it brings attention back to the idea of like an embodied viewer. Like, we're a person in a body, and we're taking a particular vantage point in a very specific space. And these paintings are more flat. And because of that, I feel like it's part of kind of trying to arrive at that maybe slightly sweet spot between feeling real and very specific, but also feeling a bit general. I had a conversation with Muriel at the gallery here last week about this, and she had a great point. And she said, oh, it's like, it's more like the concept. And that's totally true. And I think I'm a teacher. I teach drawing and painting at MCAD and Metro State here, but it's very much about the conversation you have with students. You're trying to usually get them to not do that, because let me say this a different way. If I asked people in the room, or probably not you, because there are a bunch of artists here, but like my students who are coming into freshman drawing, if I say, hey, draw a window, the window that they're going to draw is this window. And they're probably not going to draw, they're not going to draw this window, right? It's this is way too specific. This is a particular circumstance, right? And it's very observed. So these are more conceptual in a sense, and I feel like the flat viewpoint, it calls more attention to the subject, I think, that's being portrayed than the implied viewer that's doing the viewing. I hope that makes sense. And I think it's like, that's one of the things that hopefully helps the painting maybe arrive at a spot that's not too specific, because it's like the window, and that window could be kind of anybody's window in some ways. So yeah, I'm glad you reminded me of that. Any other questions? Yeah, Annie.
So, could you speak about your decision to have these all be square, and are they all square before I ask that question?
They are all square, yeah. Well, hopefully they're square. If they're not square, it's an error on my part, but
Okay,
I think they're square.
squarish.
I've been doing square paintings for about 3 years. I don't think I've done a single painting in the last few years that hasn't been square. So one of the things about that is that I feel like it's, I'm trying to think of the book that it's in. It's in one of these drawing books that we use for observational drawing. It's the one I really love. I can't remember the name of it. But they go through, like, they're talking about they're talking about implied compositions in paintings. And they're saying things like, hey, a triangle, this implies balance maybe, and a certain kind of shape is dynamism or whatever. Well, the square is geometric shape that a circle fits in. And one of the things that they say about that, which resonates with me, is this like unity, the idea of unity, or the idea of like something that is, I would just say a presence. There's something about a square, there's unity, there's presence. I feel like it kind of goes back to the idea of the house as a metaphor for self, like a square. Maybe if I was gonna, I'm not an abstract painter, but if I were going to make a painting that I felt like was a self-portrait as an abstract painting, I'd probably put it in a square, I guess. So I don't know, that's probably, those are my thoughts about that. I do think about it a little bit. Maybe practically back a few years ago when I first got on Instagram, I sort of thought, well, it'd be easier to make a square painting and not have to crop it, right, to fit. And I don't think that's the real reason, but I did get into making squares. Yeah.
So actually, I was wondering if you were going to mention Instagram, because I honestly feel like the square is incredibly challenging because it's
It is.
already hyper balanced.
Yeah.
And I feel like you've done a really good job of engaging it, and
Thank you.
you mostly have these kind of interesting focal points that really work against it and make it very dynamic. But I think the square is secretly weirdly challenging. It seems like it's going to be easy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe it goes back to, my sort of beginnings as a more naive painter, which is the square is kind of a popular shape for like primitive painters, I think. And it's, I don't know, maybe it's because it has a kind of symmetricality to it or something, I'm not sure, but.
I feel like it makes the framing feel and the cropping feel more intentional because everything in them is rectangle,
Right.
if not some other shape.
Yeah.
And so it makes it feel like the cropping is more kind of present and intentional and brings it to the forefront in a way that I think is working.
Oh, thank you. So, well, just quickly, you're all artists here and art appreciators, but I have, I don't do this work in a vacuum, right? And so just some of the people that I really kind of look at and have influenced my work. Of course, Edward Hopper, famous American painter, but I love Edward Hopper's paintings of, you're outside looking in, there's this kind of loneliness, this feeling that we get. In his paintings, it can feel a little voyeuristic. I'm not sure if mine feel that way. They weren't really intended to, but, and then definitely Edward Hopper's, although he doesn't have very many of these paintings, but some of his paintings, he got rid of the figure. Most of his paintings have these figures that are doing various things, but there's two paintings in particular, this being one of them, where he got rid of the figure, and this is the subject, the light is the subject. So that really kind of like resonates. That resonates with me. I think I like many of you, I'm sure, are a big fan of Andrew Wyeth's work. And my parents had, not this book, but a book like this full of Andrew Wyeth's paintings when I was growing up. And I would look at that book every once in a while and I thought, what an awful world this person must live in. It's all gray and it's what a drab, they don't have anything on the walls, they don't have any carpeting, all the buildings are falling down. I thought, oh my gosh, I love it now. I love everything about it, but Andrew Wyeth is definitely a big influence in kind of how he can sort of tell a story with very few elements, and he's just an incredible artist. That's somebody I look at. Catherine Murphy's someone I really love. Maybe not as well known of a painter, but she teaches at, well, I don't know if she still does, but she taught at Yale for a long time, and she's really great because this is a painting of obviously of a window. But what I love about her work is that she works from observation. So not really from photographs. As far as I know, I think she's pretty committed to that. But so it's amazing when you think about the level of concentration and just skill to do that. But I love the way that she can take something that looks sort of like nothing and make it so kind of compelling and interesting, and it's very minimal in its composition, but at the same time there's so much detail in it. This is one I really love. It's just like I can't think of a more sort of blasé kind of image. There's nothing literally going on, but that space is really compelling. It's mysterious. It's maybe a little scary. I don't know. I love it. But she's an amazing artist that I look at a lot. And the last person that's been probably the biggest influence, and Mike Harrigan introduced me to this artist in grad school, but is Hammershøi. Hammershøi is was a Danish painter, turn of the century from the 1800s to 1900s, worked in Copenhagen. And he was a painter who painted his own house, which of course I love. And he had these big apartments in Copenhagen and would follow the light. He's got several paintings of this particular window with just different sort of qualities of light coming in. And he did sometimes use the figure. I mean, a lot of his paintings have the figure in them, honestly, but I'm showing you this one because I don't think it's not my place to judge. It's not the most compelling of his paintings of his for me, but it is in one of his apartments in Copenhagen called Strandgade 25. It's this sprawling whole sort of floor of a building. And in 2018, I had the chance to go there and hang out in the house for about a week, and they let me paint in there. So I was able to, in some cases, to find the spots where he made these paintings. And so this is actually a painting from the vantage point of this. I know it's maybe hard to see. There's a window over here actually, but the space is now it's like a government office. So there was a big somebody's big cubicle in here with like computers and things that I kind of had to edit out, but it was great to sort of hang out in that space and just see kind of the qualities of light that he was still, or I should say the qualities of light that he experienced that I felt were still there to some degree. So, I do, that was part of a whole project about Hopper and Hammershøi a few years ago. But those are just that's kind of the context of artists that are, kind of like having a conversation with this work. So.
Yeah, I get excited by the spaces beyond the space you're in. So, and I see you drawing the same artists that I enjoy too. That the spaces behind them may have nothing there, but your mind is imagining what's beyond those spaces. Are you ever getting yourself caught up in that at all, or is that part of some of these, because they appear to be empty, but they tell a story?
Yeah, I don't know, Chad. I think it's like I've definitely done paintings that got more involved in like really describing the space outside the window, like, maybe like this one, for example, but I feel like maybe I'm choosing views a little bit where there isn't much going on, or maybe it's part of the painting process and I'm editing those things out a little bit, or I'm burying them in the shadows a little bit. That could be like maybe the painting behind you. I'm thinking about that. There were probably more trees and things, but they just didn't, to my mind, need to be there. They weren't going to add anything, So I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but there's a feeling of like the window is something you look out to see things. You're not really showing us anything. You're sort of concealing, in a way, the way that you pulled those doors slightly closed, or you're looking out, but all you're seeing is a fragment of something, or a window that isn't showing me anything inside. There's something kind of like your mind wants to imagine what's happening there. You're not giving us that. So kind of like it's mysterious in that way, and they feel surreal and sort of metaphysical, I guess, because of that. Like they're not explaining anything to me about why you particularly like looked out at that moment or something. I don't know. There's something very, it's all a good thing, but there's something like you're withholding a little bit from us.
Well, I think that I'm glad you're saying that, because I feel like you're reminding me of another thing that I wanted to say, which is like mystery. I think is a theme. I'm trying to always, you know, I've lived in this house for 5 years now. I feel like I've seen everything the house and the light can do, but I'm always trying to look at something familiar and maybe see it in a new way, or maybe represent it in a way that seems something you see every day, but represent it in a way that seems mysterious. That maybe that brings something to our everyday experience that is exciting. Hopefully,
That's a more satisfying answer to my question, just so you know, because you said they weren't voyeuristic at all, but my brain automatically goes there, right? Because there's these empty spaces or these spaces beyond. So, and I think that is it. You are very familiar with the space.
Yes.
We are not, so it's a different experience.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, you're right. I'm instead of just showing you the space, I'm trying to paint it in a way that I haven't already painted it, which involves hiding a lot of stuff, right? Yeah, I can see that.
That painting, there's like something weird with those windows in that painting. Like, why is there a window next to a window? Do you know what's going on there?
It's
like
my neighbor's.
A little bathroom next to
It's a bathroom.
It's weird.
Yeah, it's a bathroom, and I don't know why it's like that. This one, so you know, I've got a lot of paintings of our neighbor's house. It's our neighbors to the south, and no, not that one. This one, that one. All the same house. I don't know why I'm saying that, but I know why I'm saying that, because this one's the most accurate. Like some of the other ones, I just took a little bit of artistic license here and there with things, but this one it's very actually accurate. That's what it looks like. This is some sort of it might have been the shower curtain or like a towel hanging up or something. I don't know. Melanie took some of the photos, so.
I think that's the drape
Okay.
to the hallway.
Okay.
One of the things I really am attracted to is this that fluctuation between presence and absence, and some of the body too. Then, like where the doors are halfway open or closed, we don't know. A drawer is a little bit ajar. There's like a little bit of the sense for me. I feel like it's almost like this liminal spaces between waking and sleeping. That sometimes things come into focus, and or it's like just like, oh, there's a bright light out there, or there's something like sometimes when things in your bedroom sleeping and some things get resolved and other things don't, and you can't always see around the corners. So I kind of like that. That feels familiar, but very unfamiliar, and sometimes and almost kind of uncanny too. Like something could be happening because when you wake up, you're like, oh, what was that? Or sometimes you have a glimpse of a dream and you remember, it's like, oh, I remember something about it, but not everything about it, and you remember a shape or a color or something. So I kind of like that aspect of your work.
Thanks. That I like hearing that, and the uncanny and this, Mike said, surreal. I think those are definitely things that I'm trying to have present in the work. A kind of feeling like that for sure. Yeah.
I keep thinking of Edward Billiard's work.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because it's not the same at all. But,
He's a great colorist.
Yeah, and his patterning and the amount of emotional work, domestic, the world that's happening in there, and that these are, there's no presence of people here. I don't know why I'm thinking of him.
I can see it maybe with this one with the colors, but
Yeah, but just because there's such an enormous amount of contrast between this sort of work, which I love, this kind of work, which is so meticulous and so it is mysterious, and his work is mysterious, and yet not. So I don't know. I just thought I'd throw that out there for no reason whatsoever.
he's an artist that I really love, but it's kind of like the person, that is kind of like 180 degrees from you. Like, well, I wish I could do that, but that's not my thing. Although
No.
maybe someday, who knows?
And I'm not suggesting in any way that you
Oh,
should,
no.
or
Oh, no,
that you
no,
would,
I-
or that you would want to, but
Let's take another.
just it's domestic. His work is domestic. This is domestic just because it is a house, and he did paint all his family's apartments. And
I'm gonna look at that work more. I don't know that about him. I know some things about him, but I don't
he
know all of
recorded
that.
the amazing drama of his family. His sister and his mother and his
Okay.
brother-in-law, and everybody's just all crowded approaching, and, I mean, it's just,
Totally the opposite. Well, any other questions? I thought I would do a little demo for people who are interested. If you want to stay and see that, I can do that. It's not a long drawn out thing at all. Here's what that relates to is a little bit about process with these, because you know, I start most of these with I usually paint on a white ground. All of these are linen stretched over a panel and then primed with lots of coats of gesso. I sand them down quite a bit, and although lately I've been kind of liking a bit more texture. I guess I decided, why am I paying all this money for the linen when putting like 10 coats of gesso and 400 grit sandpaper, and they feel like porcelain. I mean, it's nice to paint on that, but I could do that in other ways. But I like there's something about there's something about painting on panels. There's a reflectivity to a panel that can be a little harsh. And I like the linen because it absorbs the light in a little different way. It's kind of a little bit softer. So that's why I've been doing it. But I start on those kinds of panels, linen over panel, and then I usually do line drawing, not super detailed, but just to get the proportions down, and then I block things in, and I get paintings. I paint fairly opaquely, meaning thicker paint, sometimes with white in the paint, just to be to make it opaque. And then I get to a certain point, I try to get the light to work painting that way. I get to a certain point, but I almost always get into some kind of glazing. So the glazing being, working with transparent colors that are suspended in a medium. And I use it a couple different ways to create surface, like a unified surface. Sheen is one thing, and then mostly I use it to unify shadows, and then I use it a little bit to introduce kind of like reflected color and reflected light. It seems to be a good tool for that. So those are the kinds of things that I do with it, but especially with these paintings. I mean, they maybe not this one so much, although I'll tell you with this one, it is glazed actually. It's mostly very opaquely painted. There's a lot of white in here, right, and everything, but the edges of these curtains, I put a transparent coat of painting medium on there, and these curtains were I just put like a really dark black brown. They were really dark, and I just slowly sort of worked that color around just so that they would get a little darker. It's just kind of like part of the process that I go through. But it applies more to a painting like this, and this is kind of what I'll demo, something like this, where I'm trying to get the light to seem as bright as possible, like it's really just strong and kind of believable, luminescent, hopefully, like this feeling like it's really strong. But in order to do that, like this only gets so bright. I can't have that warm orange yellow color and get it much brighter in terms of value. So to make it seem that present, everything else has to be pushed to be darker, but it can't get so dark that it all disappears. And so there's a balance there, and I've found that for me anyway, that glazing is the way that I kind of get it that way. So I'll get set up and I'll do that. And if you want to stay and watch, that's great.